and welcome to another episode of FooBar. In this video, we are going to talk about different patterns like the change data capture patterns, the content enricher pattern, content and message filtering pattern, and many others more. So let's get started. The first pattern I want to talk about is the change data capture. This pattern is very useful for streaming data from our database and publish it into a stream. You can use these events to power analytics, hydrate other databases, or solve different use cases. Databases contains exabytes of data and that is passive and is waiting to be queried. But sometimes you need to act when the data is modifying. Using this pattern, the change data capture pattern, you can turn your static database into something more dynamic that can trigger actions in your system. When you work with this pattern in AWS and in Serverless, you can use Dynamo as a storage as your database, and you can enable Dynamo streams. Dynamo streams will send the changes of the database into a stream of data, and those records can be sent to a pipe and then forwarded to Kinesis data stream. And then you can merge these with other streams of data or send to your data lake or send somewhere else, so you can take action of the change of your database. If you want to see demos of all this and an introduction on DynamoDB streams, I let you a lot of videos in the description box. The next pattern I want to talk about is the message and content filter pattern. This is very useful when working with streaming data, as you might need to filter events and send them forward to different parts of your system. If you have been following this series of videos, you already know how we can do filtering of records, for example, using pipes or event source mapping. And then we can forward these events either to different sources, like with pipes, Kinesis data stream, MQ, Kafka, event buses, and so on, and to different Lambda functions if you're using the event source mapping filtering. If you want to see this in actions, check the playlist, there is many examples. Also, using this pattern, you can filter out messages like you did previously, and not forward these messages forward. So maybe there is something that you don't want to forward anywhere, you just want to discard because you are not interested in processing. And you can also filter out attributes or even transform specific attributes inside those records that you don't want to forward or you need to standardize somehow way. So this pattern will help you out. Related to the previous pattern, sometimes you need to translate or enrich a record or an event to make sure that you can process it later downstream. For example, you might need to add some missing data or pre-process the data somehow or validate some record or event before passing it to your downstream services. Usually, stream data comes from external services, so it's very important to do some cleanup and validation before forwarding into your backends. And you want to make sure that this data is consistent, following some standards, and will not break those downstream services. The message translator pattern is a useful pattern, for example, in the case when your client is sending, an address, but you really need those coordinates, like GPS coordinates, to put them in the map. You can use some kind of third-party service that will transform that data into exactly what you need, and then you can send it downstream. Or you might need to standardize all your records, like for example, different clients send the name in different ways, and you want to make sure that everything is following the same format, so then your downstream services don't need to have the complexity of if-else everywhere else. You can solve the enrichment and translation and normalization pattern using event-bridge pipes, and you can use a Lambda function for the enrichment mechanism. This will process every message in the stream and transform it to your needs and to your standards, and then forward it to another, for example, Kinesis data stream, for further processing into your downstream services. The normalizer pattern goes one more step further than the previous pattern. And this one is very useful when you have different information coming from different clients. For example, this happened to me in the past when I was working in the game industry. Every SDK that we have in our games was different versions, customers were not updating, and the iOS and Android SDKs were different. So the information that we were getting from these SDKs was totally denormalized. Everything was the same, but not the same, and it was hard. So if we use the normalized pattern, what we will do is grab all the different events coming from different sources and then standardize it in one way. Each client has a different way of creating these messages, and then you can use something like step functions to standardize this. And you can do this with event-rich pipes again, using the enrichment mechanism of step function, where you can do a choice, for example, and say, okay, if the event is this type, do this standardization. If it's this type, do this standardization. If this type, this standardization. And then all your events are normalized and can be processed downstream easier. And the last bit I want to talk is pattern or not, I don't know, but it's a very common architecture that I have seen, and let's call it a pattern. And this one is the log capture. So log capture is when you have multiple applications producing logs and you want to gather them into one dashboard and then do something with it. Your applications can stream logs into Kinesis data stream from different types of applications, your front end, your back end, your clients, whatever. Everybody's sending log data to Kinesis data stream. And then the Kinesis data stream will send them to different places in order to be processed or analyzed in real time. And then you can build CloudWatch dashboards, or you can send them to a third party or to an open search service to do more drill downs, or to a Grafana, or whatever you need. This is a very useful architecture, and this pattern will help you to gather multiple logs from different applications into one source without needing to do some complex things. So use Kinesis data stream and then Kinesis data analytics, so you can filter on the spot and send to CloudWatch, or then Firehose and send to OpenSearch or some third party. So that was the video for today. I want to show some of the patterns that we have been working in this series, because there is a lot of architecture designs when we are talking about data stream. We are talking about a lot of data moving around, and it's important to understand why we are taking some of the architectural decisions that we are taking and how we got to this application that we built at the end of the series. Around here you can find the playlist where I talk about data streaming and Kinesis in a lot of depth, and in here you can find an introduction video about event-rich pipes, because maybe watching all these patterns got your attention and you want to learn more. And that's it for me today. I see you in another episode of FooBar. Ciao, ciao!